Okay, so thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm so happy to be here to talk about something that I love, something that I found very interesting, and something that I believe it is very useful. So when we're talking about assessment, testing, evaluation, all these different terms that we sometimes hear, read about, we talk about them, we like discuss with other people about these different topics. Something that I'm always aware of is that we need to understand what assessment entails. So the title of my presentation is Beyond Testing, Assessment as the Backbone of Learning. But is it really assessment the backbone of learning? So I really hope that throughout this presentation, we can answer this specific question. I'll go back to it at the end of it, and then you'll make your own reflections on this topic. So I want to start first with some different ideas that I've heard from different people around my ELT career. One of the first things that I've heard regarding testing or assessment is this. It is necessary to test second language learning? Is it? What do you think? Is it something you do? I guess you do. Most teachers do. But how can we do it? Is it different from testing a different subject? Or what about this one? Grammar and vocabulary should be primarily tested for learning purposes. Okay, two main systems, something that we care about. But are they the only ones that should be tested? What do you think? What about this one? Testing is the one and only reliable source to know how students are performing. Not sure about this one. I mean, in the end, we all make different decisions and we all have different beliefs. But the most important thing is that we inform those decisions and those beliefs. I like this one, and I hear it from most people and from most teachers. I write my own end-of-term tests based on what my students did throughout the course or throughout the term and some previous knowledge. Is it valid to do that? That you are testing what they saw throughout the term, but also adding some extra things? That's something that we need to consider. And what about the next one? Projects or extra work should also be used for assessment purposes. Most teachers are now using these projects or extra work to assess students. But is it something that is happening in every school? Are we relying only on the tests that we use for this purpose? That's something that we're going to talk about throughout this session, and I really hope these ideas and this reflection you made on these ideas can help you get more informed about assessment and make better decisions for your students. So one of the first things that we need to consider is this idea. How different is testing from assessment? Is it really different? Is it the same thing? It's just a matter of a synonym? What do you think? The way I see it is this. Testing, for me, is like this beautiful picture. This is my cat, by the way. I took this picture of my cat. And if you see my cat, you might think, oh, she's a grumpy cat. She hates everyone. She hates me sometimes. Yeah? But not at the end. She's a lovely cat. She's like a dog in the end. She loves being around people. She loves being on you. She loves doing lots of the things that you might not consider that are very cat-like. But this picture might not give you a good reference of what is my cat like. This picture only shows a portion of what's happening at that very moment. And that's what testing is all about. You can only see what's happening at that very moment when you are giving students a test. But what happens when you think of assessment? Then you have this cat looking at the mirror. And at the end, when you're looking at the mirror, you can do what happens when we are like about to leave our houses. We look at the mirror, we kind of start checking that we look marvelous, that we do look great. And that's the most important thing, that you have the chance to still make certain changes so before you get tested. So assessment gives you the chance to see a little bit more and to change things accordingly, while testing is just a small portion of something that is happening. It's just one shot of a situation. So we need to think what we want for our students. Do we want just tests? Something that shows us that something students learned at that very moment and they might not remember it later? Or we want to assess that continuously they are using different kind of knowledge or background knowledge they've been learning throughout different sessions. That's something that you need to consider whenever you want to assess students, whether to use an assessment compilation of different aspects or just a test. But the main question resides on this: how can assessment or testing be helpful for teachers? No? Can it really help teachers? How? Whenever I think of this, I remember this picture, and I love it because I consider it is the perfect explanation of our classroom. It is the perfect way to picture our classroom. We have so many different people, we have so many different ways of students and doing things and everything, that when it comes to testing, we want to test them in the same way. Imagine an elephant trying to climb a tree. For a monkey, it would be a piece of cake. But what about for a fish? Do you think that's possible? That's what happens with testing. Sometimes, and as we know it, in a classroom, we have so many different kinds of students. We have so many different levels of English. We have within one classroom that should be like the same level. That's not our reality. They are skillful in so many different ways, and one might not be the same thing as the other one or the same person as the other one. So we need to consider all these when we are thinking about assessment and testing. For example, lots of people have talked about how assessment or testing can help teachers. So Neus Figueras, who is the Ministry of Education of Catalonia, she says that learning is at the heart of language education, but also teaching is very relevant. Okay? Then we have Luke Harding, and he says that students need to understand what the test they are about to do is trying to measure. Without knowledge, it won't be very valid to let the students know. And that's why one of the first ideas that I put on the slides was, what about creating a test, an end of term test, in which you use things of the term, but also sometimes you add other things. If the students are focusing on the end of the term, they will be studying for that, they will be practicing for that, and they will be doing lots of things for that. But adding certain things that are not part of the term might not be the best way. Then we have, for example, Dr. Nick Sibyl from Cambridge English Language Assessment. And again, he talks about teaching, he talks about learning, and he talks about assessment. These ideas from these different people mention three different aspects that Neus Figueras used in something she calls the Trinity of language education. The first thing, we have learning. The second one, teaching. And the third one, assessment. What she says about these three terms, or these three concepts, is that all of them are connected. And the most important thing is that all of them are equally important. Okay? Learning is not more important than assessment, or teaching is more important than learning. All of them are equally important. And whenever we think of these three different concepts, we can see that there's something that connects them all. That backbone that connects learning, teaching, and assessment. What do you think that backbone is? That's why my presentation at the beginning, I said, is it really assessment, the backbone of teaching? Or what is it, the backbone of teaching? What about this? The LOs. What do you think LO stands for? Yeah, that's right. Learning objectives. Something that the three of them have in common is that they all need the learning objectives to actually for us to be able to do something with them. If you don't have clear learning objectives, you cannot teach. The students won't be learning, and you won't be able to create assessment. So learning objectives are the center of this equation, of this trinity of language education, as Niels Figueira says. But you should be asking yourselves, after me talking for at least 10 minutes now, Arturo, where are you heading to? I'm not really getting where you're heading. Something that I like about all this is something I found very interesting, that it can help you plan your classes more effectively, therefore have a better learning outcome and better assessment. And that's called backward design. This term was coined by Wiggins and Matt Tite, when they created this understanding by design. This philosophy, they wrote books about it, and you can find it on the internet. There's a huge information about understanding by design, and part of it is backward design. But what do I mean by backward design? Let's put it this way. What would you do first? To buy all you need for your vacation, your plane tickets, your clothes, your Airbnbs, or whatever you're staying, or see where you're actually going. Okay, all the information you need about the destination, weather, people, I don't know, anything you need to know about the destination. What would you do first? The red one or the blue one? It's not Matrix, I swear it. So, red one or blue one? So, that's backward design. To begin with the end in mind. My end is to go to a trip to Italy. So for Italy, I need to understand that there's a different language, they have different kinds of weather, okay? I need to know about the train system, I need to know about everything that I can possibly can in order for me to start buying things for my trip. I cannot buy my plane if I don't know if the time I'm actually heading to will be better for my vacation. I cannot buy train tickets if I don't know where I'm actually trying to get to. Okay, which cities. I cannot buy my Airbnb if I don't know what I'm doing in Italy. So first I need to have my end in mind. And later, I need to start planning for that end. Okay? So Stephen Covey says that to start with a clear understanding of your destination so that the steps you take are always in the right direction. That's what backward design is in simple terms, okay? And the beauty of backward design is that it can be easily applied to our teaching context. We must make sure that we have clear understanding of our students' learning objectives. And I go back to what I was saying before, learning objectives. That's where we are trying to head to, okay? If we have our learning objectives ready, then it will be just simple to travel through that beautiful highway to knowledge. So let's compare what happens when we work with backward design and what happens when we work with a traditional design of a class. We have this comparison of both types of design. When we're working with a traditional design, firstly, we need to identify the topic or the chunk of content we want to work with, and then we know that we can do that. We know that we want the students to learn that, and we know that we want to cover that. Then, after we decide for that content, then we plan a class. Yeah, we plan it in order for us to teach it, and then we create the assessment that accompanies that class. Okay. At the end of the class, I'll provide a test or a way to assess students that goes along with what I was teaching. But backward design thinks in a different way. First, I need to identify what students will be able to do at the end of the session, at the end of the term, at the end of a school year. I don't know. It all depends on what you want to do. And from that, I can create an assessment that will help me actually see if students are learning or not. So having the learning objectives clear, then having your assessment clear, it will be easier for you to start planning a sequence of lessons or a lesson that you will teach. So just making that switch will make a huge difference in the way you do things. So start considering backward design whenever you are planning your sessions. Don't think about the content first. Think about where you want students to head, and then make sure you have an assessment that focuses on assessing if students are getting there. From there, having those two elements, it will be much easier for you to plan your class. So, when we talk about backward design, there are 3 steps that are proposed for this structure. The first one, we need to identify desired results. Okay? The second one, or the second step, determine acceptable evidence. And finally, we need to talk about plan learning experiences and instructions. Exactly what I was telling you. Identify your learning objectives, then what you're going to measure those objectives with, okay, which is an assessment, a test, whatever you want to do, and then plan the learning experience. So I'll go through these 3 steps little by little for you to have a clear idea of what we want and what you can do actually. The first one, when we talk about identifying desired results, something that we need to make sure is that we need to establish curricular priorities. What happens, and it's very normal, is that we want to cover everything. It's normal because we have the books, we have everything there, yeah? And we're teachers, so it's obvious that we need to do that. But let's be honest, in a school year, it's very difficult for us to finish everything in the book, plus everything that the school is asking us to do, plus everything that we need to have to kind of work in remedial things for our students and do extra things for them. And then you have the Moms Festival, the Summer Festival, the Spring Festival, the Winter Festival. You have all seasons in a festival. So imagine when you are working with that. You cannot cover every single thing of your curriculum. So you need to establish priorities. But how can you do it? It's easier. Yes, Arturo, so easy for you to say it. Yes, I know. But I can give you these ideas and it will help you start prioritizing those aspects of your learning objectives. For example, the first thing, from all your curriculum, you need to identify what it's worth being familiar with. What students cannot miss and they need to be familiar with, okay? For example, certain topics, certain aspects of grammar, certain aspects of vocabulary, certain can-dos for listening, yeah, for all the different skills. Something you consider worth being familiar with, yeah? That takes a really good analysis from you. Then, you need to see if the things are important to know and do. From what you have in your curriculum, you need to decide, is this important to do? Is it important for students to know? That's something, and that's a decision you need to make whenever you're working with your curriculum. And finally, the last thing that you need to consider is, what about those enduring understanding? What about those topics that you know that if you use them, they will last forever and ever? Having these three ideas in mind, it will be much simpler for you to say, okay, out of all these topics I need to cover, I just need to focus on this, this, and this. Yeah? So, it's not about covering the whole curriculum. And I know, like, sometimes parents may ask you to cover from A to Z. But you also need to think how students are getting affected or not from this decision. Okay? So whenever you are also establishing your curricular priorities, you need to consider these questions. For example, to what extent does the idea, topic, or process represent a big idea, having an enduring value beyond the classroom? So, start considering, is one of the filters you can use to decide what to prioritize. The second question you can use, for example, is to what extent does the topic, idea, or process reside at the heart of the discipline? In this case, discipline, English language learning. Then you have a third question that it says, to what extent does the idea, topic, or process require uncoverage? There are certain topics that might cause misunderstanding or misconceptions, so you need to go deeper on those topics. Yeah? And then to what extent does the idea, topic, or process offer potential for engaging students, okay? There are certain topics, depending on the age, depending on the student, depending on the classroom, depending on so many things, that you know that will cause engagement for students, and there are certain topics that will be like very boring for them. So that's also something that you need to decide. So having these 4 questions, it will be much easier for you to actually establish a priority whenever you are deciding which learning objectives you need to select. Then, moving forward to the second step in backward design, which is to determine acceptable evidence. And this is where assessment plays a huge role. For example, first we need to understand that there are different methods, assessment methods for this. Yeah? For example, you can use informal checks for understanding. In the classroom, whenever you're working with an activity, you can see if students are understanding or not. It will be much simpler for you to do that. And then that's part of the assessment you're doing. You can probably give a grade, or you can make notes to give feedback to students just from those informal chats sometimes you have, from that information you're getting from students working in a group. All those things will help you and your students grow and grow and grow. The most important thing is that you use that information for better purposes, such as feedback or like remedial work, etc. Then you have observation and dialogue. As I said before, whenever you are observing your students when they are working on something, or for example, if you establish a dialogue with them, that you start like talking about certain topics, certain things they did like throughout the weekend, or something they're going to do the next weekend. I mean, there are several ways that you can establish these dialogues with them and use that information in your own benefit and students' benefit. And then we go into a little bit more academic stuff, such as quizzes or tests. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper on these topics in the next slides. So quiz test is one of the things that you can use in order to help your backward design and your assessment happen easily. Also, academic prompt, something that you can use, and I'll discuss this in a second, don't worry. Something that you can also use to establish assessment for your students. And finally, another one, whatever they need to perform, a task or a project, is part of the assessment as well. I want to focus on the last three, which are the ones that entail more work from you and also from students. So the first thing is assessment methods for quizzes and tests. Something that we need to keep in mind is that we need to understand the type of test for this specific purpose. Remember, we have different types of tests. We have diagnostic, we have placement, but what about the one that we need for this specific purpose? And for this one is achievement test, because you need to know how students are performing from a specific term, what they were learning in a specific moment, and nothing else. As I said, if you want to start checking what they know from previous courses and everything, that's a completely different test. That's a diagnostic test. So whatever or whenever you're using a test in a classroom, it should be focused on achievement, because that's what you want to do. Then you need to have a clear idea of test specifications before writing a test. For example, the purpose of the test, what skills or systems you are going to work with, the test that you are going to, the level you are going to use, the student's profile, the number of sections, the time, the marking scheme. I mean, there's lots of different things that you need to consider whenever you're writing a test. Then also to have a clear knowledge of what each system or skill entails when testing. It's not the same to test reading than assess listening, for example. Even though some of the questions might be similar, but you're working with two different skills. And what about when you are working with writing or speaking? What about grammar or vocabulary? Every single system or skill needs to be tested differently, and that's something we need to keep in mind. And then we need to avoid mistakes when we are creating tests. And you should be asking yourselves, oh, me? Making mistakes? Never. I don't do that. Yes, we do. And it's more common than you think. Whenever I've been able to see someone's test, like the teacher writing a test, we fall into the most common mistakes when writing tests. And for example, some of them could be that they are either too easy or too difficult. Yeah? We need to find a balance when we are creating a test. Then, that you are not providing the sufficient number of items for the test. Yeah? That you say, with 5 questions will suffice. Well, it might suffice if your purpose is 1. But if you want to check other things, you might need more questions. Then, for example, negative washback through non-occurring forms. When we use these mistakes to see if students know the form. When we use I is Mexican, that's an incorrect form. That's something that we should not be able to write in exam because it might cause confusion in students. So we always need to create something that is real and that it actually causes confusion, not by making mistakes within the exam, okay? Redundant wording, that you use the same word all the time. It makes it boring, but it also makes it difficult for students to read. If you know that you're going to use the same structure, better use a different stem, you have different types of cues, convergence or divergence. So depending on the type of cues you're using, you might give students which cue is the correct one by not doing it correctly. So we need to be careful that whenever we're giving the cues, we need to make sure that we're not giving the answer to the student. Mixed content, that sometimes you're mixing content from the term and then bringing some other content from a different term that students are not yet familiar or they have forgotten already. And again, if you want to test something, you need to test what students are focusing on. And if this is the term and you need to cover from A to P, then you need to make sure that your test is from A to P. Common knowledge. Asking students what are the colors of Mexican flag. It's a common knowledge. They already know. They don't need to read a text. They don't need to listen something to know that the colors of the flag are 3, and it's basically green, red, and white. Okay? So that's common knowledge. That's something that we need to avoid whenever we're writing a test. Then we have inadequate instructions. Probably you have seen lots of memes when students are actually answering a test, and whenever you read the instructions, you say, yeah, I mean, the students did what the teacher asked them to do. That was not the answer the teacher was expecting, but that doesn't mean that the student didn't understand the instruction well. So we need to make sure that the instructions you write in the test are well written, are clear for students, yeah, and they take them to the task, and it is easier for them to understand the task. Then sometimes we use a marking scheme which can be subjective, yeah. So in order to help students understand what they are being assessed on, we need to create a marking scheme which is clear for them and clear for you. To say, oh, this guy has an 8 because, well, it had some grammar mistakes. That's completely subjective. We need to have the marking scheme, and you need to let students know about that marking scheme. So those are the kind of things that we need to consider whenever we're writing a test. But what about the academic prompt, which is a different assessment method? So basically, all of these are open-ended questions to develop critical thinking on students. They require, for example, a product, a response, or for students to perform something. They require a constructed response under school or exam conditions. Then there might be multiple answers to this situation or to this specific prompt, let's say, yeah? And also you might have different strategies to answer this specific problem or this specific situation. So that means there's no one final, a simple answer. Students can get and can give different answers and different processes to get to those answers. It involves analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, okay, and/or evaluation. So having these prompts allows the students to analyze deeper, to synthesize, and to evaluate. That means we go to the high order thinking skills whenever we think of Bloom's taxonomy. It requires further explanation or defense of a given answer or methods used. So whenever you are working with a certain prompt, students might need to give you further explanation of it. Yeah, why they got to that situation or why they got to that specific response. So students need to be prepared with that. And finally, they require judgment-based scoring based on criteria and performance standards. Okay? If students do not understand or you do not have standards or criteria, it will be very difficult for you to actually give a mark or give a grade to that specific prompt or to that specific project. So you need to make sure that whenever you are working with this, to have a clear criteria of what's happening with that marking system you are using for this project. Now, for the other part of assessment methods, we have the performance tasks or projects, which are very similar to the academic prompts, but in this case, they tend to be like, for example, they mirror issues adults face, no? You use situations in which adults are immersed. So sometimes it is more difficult to use one of these in primary, for example. Yeah, so you need to find situations in which students might find complication in producing and also preparing. Yeah, because that's the nature of these performance tasks or projects. They can be multi-staged. I mean, you may have different ways of working with this, but the most important thing is that each stage has a purpose, yeah? And you can work with them with short or long-term projects, okay? Probably it could be like within a month or the whole school year. You decide. Then it requires that students address an identified audience, okay? They know the audience, so that it would be much simpler for them to say, okay, this is my audience, so this is the way I need to talk to them. They are based on a specific purpose related to that audience. So again, having that clear in mind, it will be easier for them to construct something. Allows personalization of the task, okay? Knowing the type of students or knowing the audience, they can make different arrangements to help them. And finally, task, criteria, and standards are also known in advance. Before starting the whole thing, students need to know what is happening with the grading criteria, with what is expected from them. Yeah? So the rules should be given before start these tasks or projects. So with this, having all these different assessment methods and then comparing it to the curricular priorities, we can see that going back to this scheme, that we have what is worth being familiar with, what is important to know and do, and what is enduring understanding, we can then kind of match the type of assessments to this. For example, whenever you're thinking of tests or quizzes, these can match perfectly to things that are worth being familiar with or with important things to know and do. And whenever you're using projects or tasks, then they can be also related to important things to do or know, or enduring understanding. Okay? So having said that, it is easier for us now to determine an acceptable evidence for us to create a better backward design lesson plan. At the end of it, we have then to start planning the learning experience, to actually plan your class, to do what you do best. And for that, you may need to think of different questions for planning that learning experience. The first thing is, what enabling knowledge and skills will students need to perform effectively and achieve the desired results? So that's something that you need to keep in mind whenever you are constructing your lesson plan. Whenever you are deciding what activities you're going to use and everything, that's something that you need to keep in mind. The second thing, what activities will equip students with the needed knowledge and skills? There are certain activities that we call them fillers that might not be really to equip them with anything. It's just a filler. But there's other activities which are essential within the classroom that have a specific purpose and that are actually developing the students' skills or knowledge. So you need to identify which one is which one and to give the priority to those who are actually developing something. Then you have what will need to be taught and coached, remember here, coached, and how it should be best taught in the light of performance goals. Okay? So what different kind of approaches you need to use in order to teach something? What else you need to do to accompany students to get to the goal you are actually thinking of? And then the type of materials and resources that are best suited to accomplish these goals. Yeah? Anything you consider necessary for students to accomplish the goals, that's what you need to use. And finally, is the overall design coherent and effective? Once you finish planning your class, you need to go through it again and say, is it coherent? Are the steps I am using, okay, correct? The approach I'm using is correct. Is it correct for this class? Is it correct for the skill or for the system I'm working with? Those are the kind of things you need to consider before actually putting into action this plan. So in the end, we need to consider that the teacher will address the specifics of instruction and planning. That's up to you guys. That's something that you need to make. Those choices about teaching methods, the sequence of lessons, the resource materials, that's up to you. But that, you need to do it after you identify the desired results and the assessment. Once you have those in mind, it will be, as I said from the very beginning, it will be much simpler for you to plan your session. Okay? So don't forget learning objectives, which are the desired results, and assessment. Once you have those, planning comes next. But then you should be asking yourselves, Arturo, that's a lot. Help me. How, where, when? Help. I know it can be a lot. Yeah? So I found different websites or apps that might be of help. And I'm not going to go over it one by one because I'll take ages. But these are some of the things I found over the internet with different platforms and different like apps for you to use. For example, iSpring, Socrative, Spiral, Pgrade, Google Forms, those who use the Google worksheets and workspace, sorry, Edpuzzle, Mentimeter, Quizalize, Edutopia, Teach Thought, Cult of Pedagogy, and PBL Works are basically sites for teachers. So go through them, you will find lots of different ideas for you to create projects, for you to create to extract projects from them, to extract ideas from them, and that will be awesome. And also, what we have with Enrichment Solution. You have your Richmond Learning Platform in which you have all your students' books, all your teachers' books, you have your workbooks, you have audios, videos, games, worksheets, activities, you have plenty of them. You also have different types of tests, diagnostic, achievement, placement. You have a mark book within the platform. And also you have communication tools to create these projects more easily. The most important thing is, guys, that the sky is the limit. The sky is the limit. Don't forget that. Don't get all nervous. Don't get oh, what I can do. Don't worry. There are so many things out there in the web, in the Richmond Learning Platform that you can use. Use them. They are available for you. Okay? So before I go, I have a little surprise for you. And that is, if you like reading, and I'm sure you do, most of the information I got for this presentation, I took it from different articles and different books I read. So if you scan this code from your phone, you will have access to 15 different articles about assessment. So go read them. I love them. Those are the ones I like the most. And I think as teachers, we should be always sharing with people who are always suffering with that. So just to say goodbye, I want to go back to the title of my presentation. and I would change it this way. Beyond testing, assessment, teaching, and learning as a backbone of a student's development. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. That's my email address. You have my LinkedIn account and also my Facebook account. If you want the articles, also let me know and I can send them to you. Thank you so much.
Arturo, thank you very much for sharing all your vast experience on this subject matter, which is always a decisive moment in the teaching and learning process. It is now the moment to ask you some of the questions from our audience. And Sandra from Ecuador is asking, why do you believe school administrators or teachers are sometimes fearful to use projects or other means as the main part of assessment?
That's a great question, Maya. Actually, what I have heard from others, from other colleagues, is that the fact that they don't have the evidence, like a test, to show parents, to show the school supervisors, to show the coordinators that students are progressing, they find projects a little bit like difficult to show that evidence to parents or to teachers or to other colleagues. So that's why they prefer sometimes just use the different type of tests in order to give like school principals, like the evidence they think it's correct. So projects also take a lot of time. So preparing a project is not simple. So imagine that you have only a couple of hours throughout the week, and then you need to spend those hours also preparing a project. So it's a little bit of time, it's a little bit of evidence that sometimes the schools, parents, directors, principals ask for. And that's why they prefer to say, I'll go just for the tests.
Usually happens.
Well, that was actually an interesting answer to see and to analyze and see how feasible it is for a schools project to incorporate these projects. But we have time for one more question. And you mentioned before the term acceptable evidence. What would be an example of acceptable evidence for assessment? This is a question from Leonardo in Dominican Republic.
Of course, acceptable evidence, it would be something that students can't perform at their level. Sometimes as teachers, we expect students to know every single thing, to have a perfect English when they have an assessment or when they have a test. But the reality is that that's not the case. Just imagine, like a Cambridge assessment, all the different Cambridge assessment that we have, the key, the preliminary. Whenever you read the information that you find on the website, they are asking for very simple evidence that students can actually say their name, can actually just answer or reply to a question by just nodding or by just saying one word is sufficient for an institution like Cambridge. And sometimes as teachers, we want students to be just perfect and to have the perfect grammar and to have the perfect vocabulary. That's not the case. So acceptable evidence will be anything that students can do at the level they are at. So that would be.
Wow, that's a great answer. Thank you very much. And there's a lot of information that we take with us today and that we will all reflect on. Assessment is certainly like a passionate topic, and there's much to do and continue with the transformation of education.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation. I loved being here, and I really hope you guys find assessment a little bit more, I don't know, easier, accessible for you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.